Welcome back to Alexander's Adventures. Today, primer on cold weather layering. I'm going to start off with listing out some of the types of layers that you should be looking for if you're going to be traveling into or going on an adventure in cold weather environments. So the first thing is you'll have a base layer, which is going to consist typically of long underwear, which could be lined or unlined. And then on top of that, you'll likely want to have with you an expeditionary layer, which is generally meant for very cold environments. We're talking somewhere south of 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and typically is associated with either high altitude or Arctic environments. Usually it's also associated with low activity. So if you are somebody who works in a place where you're not moving around a lot, but you might be outside all the time, that's definitely a good thing to have with you. The next layer up is of course going to be your weatherproofing layers. So that would generally be your typical clothing. So if you're just walking around Chicago and you want to be prepared for the cold weather there, but you also need to look the part like you're going to work or some such thing, then your outer layer is of course going to be your business suit or your jacket, things like that. For more extreme environments or adventuring, you're probably going to go for something that's a synthetic material that's going to offer both weatherproofing and some warmth by a liner of some kind, be it fleece or corduroy or what have you. And then your outermost layer will typically be something that is going to be catered toward the specific activity that you're taking on. So if you're working in weather, you're going to want to have, tough clothing that's going to stand up to, and I mean physical labor type working, like if you're someone who's a mechanic or something like that, you've probably already figured this out. But if you're climbing, it's got to be lightweight, and it's got to be durable, but it has a limited amount of durability that needs to be associated, because you're not going to typically be doing something very strenuous in terms of imparting damage to your layers. So the material that it's going to be made out of is generally going to be very thin and meant for much shorter duration use than the types of equipment that you would use on a daily basis for a 24/7 type of job. So I'll show you some examples that I have with me. So first off, I'll start with the base layer. I actually have one with me right here. So this is actually my exercise pants. I know it's not very typical for guys to wear yoga pants, but I prefer them. They have pockets on the sides, and I actually have a set for myself that I've customized with belt loops so that I can carry heavyweight items if need be. And they're great because they offer sun protection. They also wick moisture away. They're very lightweight. They pack down very small. You can find stuff like this online for very low prices. They're pretty easy to find, and nearly all of them are going to be high enough quality that you shouldn't be terribly concerned about whether or not you're getting something that will last. It's generally the workmanship that will be subject to slightly different pricing levels, and of course personal preference about if you want to get something that's sourced from the United States, or if you're not from the United States, your country, or if you're okay with international business. I don't really put a whole lot of thought into that. Frankly, there's a lot of really great stuff that comes out of specific places in the world, and if you're looking for something low cost, get it from somewhere that's going to make it high quality and low cost. So the others I have are essentially the same thing, but they're microfiber lined. I go for synthetics when it's right up against my body, largely because there's a lot more wear that's going to happen there, especially for something like this. When I wear it as an external layer for exercise, I wear these things out pretty quickly, maybe 6 months or so, and they've already got holes in them somewhere. I don't know if that's just me being hard on them or if that's typical, but I think it's probably typical. The next thing up is going to be an external layer, and I'm going to use an example of something. This is just weatherproofing. So this is a a very thin material that its intended purpose is just to keep rain and wind off of you. So this will actually go over what I'm wearing right now. It's winter right now, and where I am, it's fairly cold. This is my Monkey Man fleece from Mountain Hardware Gear, and I am rather fond of these. They're pretty expensive, but I bought this for the expeditions because it's extremely lightweight and its thickness is it's significant. I mean, it's not a typical fleece, and the insulation value is really high, but it also allows the wind to blow right through it, which is really great for scalability. And that's something that I think is missed by a lot of people when they start looking at how to construct their layering system. Because when you're building your layering system, you don't have to have all of the different levels. You just need to have enough, and each of those different material or items need to accomplish something that's going to serve the whole system that you're taking with you. Because if you're doubling up on things, if you're hiking, you're carrying a lot of extra weight with you. If you're working and you have your stuff available to you, of course that's going to create an environment where you have a different system. Honestly, what I have with me now is really not entirely well suited to what I do, but low cost, I already have the gear, and I don't do things that are so strenuous that I have to worry so much about the durability of my equipment. So something like this is really excellent. It's extremely light, and there's actually, I have a pair of pants that do the same thing. Pants, for me, when it comes to weatherproofing layers, it's very important to understand exactly how you're going to apply it. I normally wear pants of some kind that these will go over. So I've already got an external layer, and if I'm in a hotter environment where I'm just wearing my yoga pants, I might forego external pants altogether. In fact, I usually do, because those do enough of a job protecting me from the environment. But if it's colder, I'll wear that base layer, and then I'll typically have a pair of hiking pants or something over it, again, for durability, usually a synthetic material of some kind. Those weatherproofing pants I will have with me just in case it starts to rain or the wind kicks up and it gets cold enough that I need to throw something on. But it's extremely important to understand when you're going to be doing that. And for me, putting that on when it starts to rain or when the wind kicks up, I've got to have full zip sides that I can open. And that's what these guys do. And that's not always true of a full zip piece of gear. So keep that in mind. Now, just because you can get versions that have a full zip that open at both the top and the bottom, does not mean that if you have a pair of pants like this and they don't disconnect at one end or the other, you can get a new zipper sewn onto them. So don't throw that piece of gear away. If you bought something that looked great, it worked great. In fact, this happened with my down pants, which I didn't actually need a whole lot, to be honest, but I'll get to that in a minute. They were full zip, but with big boots and stuff like that, they have to be able to disconnect and open if you want to put them on under those circumstances. So you know what, I'll roll right into that. When I was climbing Island Peak, that was the first time that when I climbed Aconcagua, that was the first time that I used those, and I really overestimated my need for cold weather gear under those circumstances. Now, it's important to understand that what I was doing was very physically intense. So when I took off from Camp 3 and started the summit climb, I was very cold. It was midnight. It was extreme. It was dark, and I quickly heated up. It maybe took 20 minutes before I was well warm enough that I did not need at least the expedition layer that I had on, and my down pants were definitely overkill. Now, I was smart enough to actually bring everything with me, which isn't the best thing to do on a summit push, but thankfully I had over-prepared at least well enough physically to be able to deal with the extra weight that I took with me. And our pace was slow enough, myself and the team, that we didn't have to, we didn't slow up too much with having to deal with those issues. And it was my first time ever doing a high altitude mountain climb. So I was a little bit better prepared when I went to the summit on Island Peak. I didn't actually have my down pants for that one, and that was why. But I found out on that expedition that my down pants are not a disconnecting full zip. And I didn't send them back, and I haven't actually modified them yet, but that's largely because I haven't got another high altitude climb on the calendar. Obviously, COVID has really screwed that up for everybody, at least plans, I mean. But there will be one eventually, and when I do that, I will get those modified. I'll replace the zippers with zippers that do disconnect, because having those large boots on, I cannot be taking those off in order to put a new layer on like that. That just is not a good idea, especially considering where I was and what I was doing. So that's a very important thing to consider about your gear. You need to be 100% certain of exactly how you're going to use it before you decide what types to acquire. So consider that, and if you're going to do an outer weather layer and take the same kind of approach that I've taken, where your scalability is going to include the ability to replace or remove those external layers both for your top and your bottoms, then make sure you get those full zips that will actually allow you to do that. So tops, of course, quite a different thing. It's very typical for tops to have full zip like this. There are, of course, available like sweaters, and a sweater would generally, I think, be considered an expedition layer, because expedition layers are something you would throw on because you expect to be in an environment where even when you're moving or working, it's still cold enough that you need to have that extra core warmth. So full zips, not really all that necessary, although if you can get something that has a zipper versus something that doesn't, totally personal preference, I would go for the zipper simply because it makes it easier to scale, and I'm not the greatest at estimating exactly how my body's heat level is going to be with what I'm doing, and especially for my work, can be totally unexpected. Now, once you've gotten past your expeditionary layers, you've got, of course, your full zip outers that when it comes to jackets is obviously going to be the primary choices available. You can get smocks, which will go over the top and have no openings like this, which if you're going to climb an 8,000 meter peak, probably very important that you consider if you want to use something like that versus something that does not have a zipper, because that area where the zipper sits is of course going to have an insulator behind it. I don't remember what that's called, but it's still going to allow some heat to escape, and it will add some weight and complexity to the system. So it's important to consider. You do have options there, but primarily you're going to have a full zip, and this Monkey Man fleece, of course, like I said, I'm singing its praises, it's my favorite. It does not have any internal pockets for obvious reasons. I like the fact that it's got these external hand warmer pockets, but they can also zip up because this is a great way to scale it too. You've got mesh in here, so if you open this up, it'll allow a little bit more airflow, but you can get your hands in there and keep them warm as well. Now, one thing that this lacks that I would prefer, and you could get put on them, but so far this has turned out not to be all that consequential for me, is a zipper on the bottom. It's more important for your weatherproof layers because, of course, they won't let any airflow through unless you have an opening. With this, I found that it isn't really that necessary, but it was something I considered when I started looking for a layer to sit at this level. Again, the more zippers, the heavier it is, the more difficult it is to pack down, so not quite as suitable for what I was doing, which is why I landed on this. Now the last one I'm going to go over is this jacket right here. This was a budget choice, and it's largely because at the time I was already spending quite a lot of money. I'm sure when you go start looking at the gear, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Good stuff is expensive. I am a big fan of buy once, cry once. So you spend the money the first time, the piece of gear you're going to get is much more likely to serve you well for a long period of time. I totally understand if you don't have the money to spend. There are plenty of options out there that are better for budget-minded buyers. But for my expedition, I needed to have something that would accomplish what I needed. And frankly, when I looked at this thing, the first thing that it struck me about it was its appearance. And the reason that that was profound for me is basically where you see this darker material, this is a thicker material than the lighter gray here. This lighter gray is actually it's a ripstop nylon. Now it's a really, really, really tight weave. I don't know if you can see that. The squares are very, very small. We're military guys. If you've ever had ripstop nylon on your gear, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty large squares. It's kind of the cheaper stuff. It's like a thicker material. This is what more typical of what you're going to see with expedition gear. That's of course lighter weight. And then on the interior, you have this orange. So if this is ever open, say I'm getting loopy from altitude or something like that, then one of my expedition mates will see this, and that's an immediate sign that I'm in trouble. And on top of that, if I need rescue, this is really great. I could even remove the hood or turn it inside out and have this color showing. So those things were all things that I considered, and not every piece of gear came like this. This is, I thought, and this is again Mountain Hardwear gear. That was coincidence. I'm not a brand loyalist of any kind. Good gear is good gear. It doesn't really matter who it comes from. But this, it was a budget buy, but it wasn't a budget buy because I was looking for something that was lower cost. It happened to be on sale and was actually a design that was on the way out at the time that I bought it. Now, the biggest drawback of this piece of gear was actually its weight, and that was the reason I believe they were making a new version. This is slightly heavier than most of the other down jackets I was looking at. But it's important to understand that not all down jackets are made for the same reasons. There are a multitude of them that are built as intermediary layers to replace something like this. And they work great, but they are more delicate, and they also typically don't let wind through. So again, considering exactly what you're planning to do with your gear, you need to put that in mind when you start looking at that stuff. Understand the characteristics of each layer is going to play into how you're going to use it. So I decided my external layer would be a large jacket that might weigh a little bit more, but no matter what happened, I knew I would have this thing because it packs down pretty tiny. I mean, just looking at this guy, there's a lot of room that just gets taken up from the air inside of those pockets. And of course, when you store something like this, you don't want to leave it like that forever because it will actually start to compress the down, and that's how it gets its insulating properties, so you don't want to leave it that way. But I did have an expedition mate when we were climbing Island Peak who unfortunately overestimated her need for insulation on the summit climb. And when we were about 300 feet below the summit was when she started to show signs of having, it amounted to what I think is probably altitude sickness. I don't know that that was exactly what that would look like, but she was starting to show a little bit of delirium is what it was. And I could see her lips were purple. She wasn't talking like she normally does. She's a very, very intelligent lady, and when she turned around to respond to me, when I asked her how she was doing, it was just, she was not the same person. And we had to enact a little bit of our expedition guide, who is also a wonderful lady. She came up and we relieved her of her exterior jacket, and it turned out that that was the major reason. She was just overheating. And she's the type of woman who really knows how to push herself physically. I mean, has run multiple marathons and is just a really accomplished athlete. And she just had not had a lot of experience with those types of environments. And that is what tends to happen. So it's important to understand how you're going to approach your system. And it's something that you should consider before you go buying your gear, exactly how you want to do it. Because there are a lot of personal choices that are going to go into how you do your layering. And if you do it well, you won't have to take as much stuff with you, and you will have a lot more of what nut and fancy fans out there will know is called firepower when it comes to wilderness gear. You want to have a lot of range that your gear can cover with as few pieces as possible, and that also allows you to, it gives you a number of other advantages as well. you have fewer things to repair, fewer things to carry, fewer things to look after, and then fewer pockets to lose things in. But obviously, that's not the biggest thing. So, yeah, just big takeaways here. I want you to remember when you go looking for your gear, consider how you're going to use it first, and then understand you have all those options available in terms of what the gear itself will do, and put together something that makes sense to you and how you're going to use it.
The one saw concert where Linkin Park was the main highlight and Incubus was opening for them.
What?
Yeah,
Alright.
best concert.